Hi, everybody. Sean Woodland, Tommy Marquez, Lauren Kalil, and Brian Friend wanted to hop on live here and react to what is going on, what just happened about a little more than an hour ago. Some very big news. Mal O'Brien announcing on her Instagram page that she will not be competing at semifinals and therefore won't be competing for the rest of the season. I'll get the post here so we can all see it. So we can all take a look at what exactly was said. And she wrote, and I'm quoting here, "With a heavy heart, I'd like to share that I won't be competing at semifinals this weekend. Sometimes we face personal challenges that demand our attention and care. It's important to prioritize our well-being and embrace the support of loved ones. While I won't be competing, I'm grateful for the understanding and encouragement from my coach, Matt Fraser, and my HWPO training team, friends, family, and fans. Their unconditional support means the world to me. Remember, life isn't just about winning trophies or achieving goals. It's about finding balance, taking care of ourselves, and cherishing the moments that truly matter. I'll be taking this time to focus on what's important to me, and I appreciate your understanding during this period. I wish the best of luck to my teammates and my competitors." So that is that kind of came out of the blue, and that's been a huge shock for a lot of people. So we want to, first of all, we just want to wish Mal O'Brien all the best. I think there's two things going on here. First is that there's a human being who is hurting and needs to step away from being in the public eye and competing to focus on herself. The second is the sporting aspect of this and how this affects the women's field. We're going to talk mostly about that. And you can see the website at the bottom of the screen there. If you guys want to go to BeFriendlyFitness.com, Brian has an article all about it, but we want to talk about that here today. But just, first off, we can just go down the line here. What are everyone's reactions to hearing this? I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people are just shocked right now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you see something like this and just the way that she wrote it, my heart breaks for her. It truly does, especially thinking of what we all do in the sport and the conversations that we've probably had with her. It's mostly about her as an athlete and how amazing she's been. And I mean, she won the Open, she won quarterfinals, she was potentially projected to win the CrossFit Games. And that's really what the focus has been. But kind of peeling back those layers and remembering that there's not only a human behind that, but a 19-year-old girl and the pressures that she must face as a professional athlete. Not many people can say that. And she's so lucky to have the training camp and the people in that training camp supporting her, because that is truly a great group of people. And, my heart just goes out to her and to the whole training camp. I mean, even you can see from the comments right there that she's just so loved and supported by those people in her circle.
That's important, right? It's not just people in her circle too. It's people in the community, her peers at the games, fans, other people, and it goes without saying, like, everything at this point beyond her own health and well-being is not even secondary. It's a distant third, fourth, whatever you want to call it, because it's important. It's important to know that, like, identity and self-worth as a human isn't necessarily tied to the conditions that we tie ourselves to, like being an athlete or being this person, or being out on the competition floor, or really being anything other than just being Mal. Nor is the praise and love and adoration that we put onto these athletes and these people, it's not tied to the fact that you're just competing either. It's more than that, and it's hard to see sometimes when we get caught up, in the car wash that can be, this sport as we rifle through the season. But also, time away can also provide perspective for us to view and see it from almost from like an objective third person, to understand that, like, hey, like, my entire being isn't just being an athlete, or all these things aren't just tied to me being an athlete, that there's still, to relate it back, like, there's still Haley Adams underneath, there's still Mal O'Brien underneath, there's still that person underneath that is just as worthy of love and praise and support, competition or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's I think that for we see this and it's immediate. It's very unlikely this is an immediate decision. I'm sure this is something that was well thought out, probably over a period of time. Many conversations are probably had. And obviously it's amazing that there are people around her to have those conversations with and give her the confidence to make the choice that's best for her. But I think, expanding a little bit and just thinking about the context of the athletes that are competing in this sport, especially on the women's field, they're getting younger and younger, and they're getting better and better at younger and younger ages.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter how old you are, what sport you play, or even if it is a sport. When you're competing or striving to be the best at the world, it's something. Pressure comes from a lot of different angles and a lot of different sides, and how people react to that is always going to be varied. So as people who cover this sport and who have an opportunity to talk about some of these athletes and the incredible achievements that they have, I just kind of reflect on the recent interview that you guys posted with Matt Torres. He coaches two women who are very competitive in this sport, in Danielle Brandon and Emma Carey. And obviously Emma's the same age as Mal. They've competed together for a long time. And listening to Matt talk about them, he didn't really talk much about their CrossFit. He talked about their identities, and what he needed from Emma and what he needed from Danielle was not to show up in the gym and work hard. Like, they do that. They wouldn't be where they are without having that discipline, commitment, work effort, and obviously talent. But to be able to have that separation, that Emma Carey is not just Emma Carey, the CrossFitter, is what he said, that she's Emma, and that she's Danielle, and that she's Haley, and she's Mal, and to keep those things in mind. And if it's, the decision that they've come to refocus this period of her time for whatever reason, then I think there's nothing any of us can do but appreciate everything we've gotten from her already, and be there to support her in any way we can with whatever the next steps are.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Brian. And I think sometimes something that we forget, and I'll put myself out there too. The people who talk about the sport and talk about the athletes, we oftentimes forget that some of these, they're kids. Like Mal O'Brien is a kid, and it's always been a rule of thumb for me, when you cover the sport, that it's always, performance and not people. And a lot of times I think we adhere to that pretty well. I'm never going to attack an athlete personally. We might say, hey, this person needs to get faster. This person needs to be stronger. And that's all fair game, in the context of covering sports. But I think sometimes what we need to just take a step back and remember is that when you're a teenager and you hear that can be taken a lot differently. And I think I'm just going to spend some time reflecting on that a little bit. I don't know the specifics of what Mal's dealing with or anything like that, but clearly she needs some time to work on herself. Wish her all the best. And I give her a ton of credit for being, 19 years old and making what seems to be a very adult decision. And she has her whole career ahead of her. She will be back, I'm sure, at some point, and will have plenty of time to rack up multiple gold medals like we all expect her to do. And it's from a fan standpoint, you're disappointed you don't get to see her compete, but the human being is what matters here.
Yeah.
As I mentioned at the top here, the second part of this now.
Well,
is,
I do want to say
Okay,
something. Yeah, because I think you touched on a point there. I also think that we need to be very open and honest about the fact that, like, this support and love isn't also provided on the condition that she does come back.
That's a really good point.
For sure.
Just as much as the option is on the table for you to work on yourself and come back, and because those are expectations that we are placing on as fans and as people in the sport, and it's just as a valid path for her to work on herself and decide that she doesn't want to do that, and that's totally okay. Yeah, that's just as you have to include that just as much as a possibility, a reality, for you to be objective on that scenario, and that doesn't change anything for her. If she decided to walk away from the sport for good, she would still be just as worthy of a human no matter what.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, and not that I want to necessarily make the parallel between her and Haley Adams, because I don't know the details behind why Mal is stepping away, but that the two of them are friends, and I just hope that them taking this time away, maybe they can go on a vacation together. Maybe they can, find something else that they have in common that just allows them to be kids, because both of them were high-level teen athletes, jumped basically immediately into the individual division. The amount of pressure that these girls, that's really what they are, from girls to women, are facing, and you could say about the boys to men division too, but just seeing this now for a second time in one season, it breaks my heart, because I hope that they have the resources and the people to lean on to get to the mental state that they need to be. I know what it was like to be 19, and I was not anywhere near a professional athlete.
Neither.
And you feel like the world is caving in with the most minute things that feel that way at the time, but I mean, she's a professional athlete that has, I don't have her Instagram pulled up, but way more followers on social media than we would have, any of us would have ever dreamed about at her age. So I just hope maybe her and Haley can, go to Florida, sit on a beach, have a virgin daiquiri, or
Good catch there.
Yeah.
play some volleyball together. Yeah.
I go to Europe and it doesn't matter, but
exactly.
but that's the thing. Like, it's crazy to see it. They were, like, as athletes, they were a brand before they were legal adults, right? And you think about, like, that's not something that, I don't want to say it's not natural, because it's kind of the world we live in, but like it's something that, like, is so new to this space. Like, we're a decade-ish into this world of social media and what that looks like from a brand and an athlete and an exposure perspective. And as kind of helping ways in here too, like, the weight that's already on teenage girls is enormous. And then you add the compounding factor of being a professional athlete, being someone that has to have 500,000 followers on Instagram and has to do sponsorship stuff and all these other things that, like, man, like, most people will never be ready for that, much less at that age. And I'm glad that at least, you can also appreciate, like Sean said, the decision to recognize it now, to step back. But
and even as Sean mentioned, I hope that, I've never made an indirect comment that put unnecessary pressure on her. I think we probably all feel that way, because we love talking about high level athletes and how they're performing. And I don't know how that is received to somebody who could be going through it, or what have you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about now the sport part of this side of what's going on here. And you can see Brian just released an article. It's on his website, BeFriendlyFitness.com, about the effect now that this has on the women's field. Because now you have, obviously Tia's not there. The woman who many people thought would be standing on top of the podium in her place this year is now not there. And I think now you go down, and I'll just start the conversation here. You go down, and I think that most people now go to Laura Horvath as maybe the favorite. Maybe not the overwhelming favorite, but maybe the favorite. So, Brian, how does this affect the women's field?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Tia and Mal being out, Cara Saunders not competing this year, Haley Adams not competing this year, Christy Aramo not competing this year, Lucy Campbell. There's 6 of the top 16 women from the games field last year that won't even be in the semifinals. So there's a lot of opportunity, and that's how I look at it. And I've already seen some comments about, well, whoever wins this year, they win in a one if. And it's like, and when it comes to sports, I never feel like you can have that perspective. All any team or athlete can ever do is work hard, show up, and compete. And whoever you compete against is not your responsibility. Whatever the test is, you take it. And for any of the women that are remaining at the top of this sport, I mean, I wouldn't approach anything any differently. But for us who get to, take a step back and say, okay, well, what are the possible, implications for some of these women in terms of their career and their legacy here? If you want to start with Laura Horvath, that's great. I mean, Laura's done everything other than win, and there's an opportunity for her to win. You can go to someone like Brooke Wells. She's done incredibly well, consistency, battling through adversity, coming back, etc. But she's never been on the podium. Well, here's her chance. Like these women, I think, obviously they have relationships with their competitors. So many of them know Mal, and I'm sure they'll reach out and give condolences and whatever. But 2 days from now, the competition starts, and this is the competition they've been training for and what they've been getting ready for. And I think that they'll still show up with the same tenacity, the same commitment, the same passion. And in addition to that, an opportunity that they maybe didn't realize they were going to have.
I have a thought about Laura Horvath, and I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on this. I feel like if you think she is capable of winning, and if you think she isn't, those two camps are more or less saying the same thing. They just reverse the order in which they're saying them. So you'll hear one camp, the people who think she could win will be like, yeah, she's got a little bit of a weakness with the deficit handstand push-ups, but she can do all this other stuff. And then the people who think that she can't win will just say that she can do all this other stuff, but she can't do this. It's like everyone's just saying the same stuff. It's just in a different order.
Yeah. Or what you're giving more weight to.
Right.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, regardless of who was in the field competing this year, I thought, well, I should say absent Tia, I thought Laura had as good a chance as anyone to win.
Agreed.
I still think if you look back at what actually happened over the course of last season at the games, she wasn't that far off, but there was also the worst possible workout for her, and we know what that is going to produce. Will that same workout show up this year? Has she made any progress in that? She actually posted a video of herself doing some handstand push-up work not too long ago, which is quite rare. She rarely posts anything that has to do with that, very well-known element of her game. And I think that she's extremely driven, extremely hungry. She's like we have been talking about a little bit this year, like that 25, 6, 7 year, like that's the sweet spot. And that's right where Laura is right now. So as good as she's been since we first saw her in 2018, I still think we're getting a better version of her than we've seen yet this season. And with the opportunities before her, I hope that it's even more encouraging and motivating for her to step up to the plate, go down a good performance at semifinals and show up with that same aggressive attacking mentality that we know her to have at the games.
Yeah. And she doesn't get enough credit for the resiliency that she's built into her game over the last couple of years. Like keep pushing forward and regardless of what anyone says, continuing to show up and continuing to hammer events and hammer strong performances and, end up back on the podium, back-to-back years now. It's less common because we don't highlight the fact when it does happen, but many athletes do, hit that road bump or hit a tough stretch and don't come back from it, And so it should be celebrated when athletes do, for sure.
Does this at all, from a fan standpoint, for any of you, what does this do to the excitement level for you going into the women's competition?
Well, I think you just have to redistribute your areas of focus in terms of when it comes to excitement. But I don't think there's any shortage of excitement in the women's field because of the opportunities that are created. I mean, I mentioned Laura and Brooke, but what about Annie Thorsdottir? There were already people saying, is Annie in contention to win this year with Mal and Laura in the field? And what would that mean if you're talking about legacy? Going from 2011 and coming back and winning in 2013, but I don't even care about winning. I mean, if she podiums this season, which she's certainly, I would say, like the odds would suggest she's in a podium hunt or position. I mean, she's just continuing to extend excellence in the sport for a duration of time that we haven't really seen. And if she does string together another podium finish 12 years after doing it or 13 years after doing it for the first time. So I think that excitement is abundant for a lot of different women. And, obviously people have to grieve this loss. Some people were extremely excited for the prospect of what Mal could achieve this year and going forward. But, everyone will deal with that in their own regard. And I think very soon when we see the level of competition, even this first week in North America East, people will realize there are still some incredibly talented women out there, a lot of them with a lot to fight for.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No. I was just curious if this then makes it easier for you guys to pick who is going to get a ticket at semifinals with essentially one more spot.
I mean, anytime, I think this goes for the, obviously predictions, but also if you want to say quote unquote excitement about the competition, maybe even looking forward to the games too. Like how often, like what are the things that we get excited about, right? We get, we get excited about like transcendent performances, the things that, leave us with our jaws on the floor. But we also get excited about the good races, the pressure and the competition amongst athletes that help elevate one another to these exciting new heights. But it usually comes from proximity, right, on the leaderboard in an event. And now if you're effectively taking someone that most people had penciled in for a podium spot, anytime you effectively track down one spot on the leaderboard, it doesn't just open it up to one person. It opens up to the 2 to 3 people that are also within earshot points wise there. So there's a multiplication factor. So by taking Mal out of the equation or having her step aside, there's now another 2 to 3 women that could points wise be in that hunt. Now, granted, only one's going to get it, but that's just generally how the races for these leaderboards, each spot you go down looks like. So now you're putting, 2 to 3 athletes worth of camps, families, people, investment into that race now. And I think there is a cause to also be made to add that it's going to be different, but there's also going to be excitement around it.
Does this remind you of all like 2014 when you had Sam had just come off the win? She doesn't qualify.
Yeah.
Annie was coming back from the injury. I think you had Julie Fouché. Well, it was what I mean. I'm super excited. And again, I'd love to see Mal compete. But this now becomes, to quote Wex, it's going to be a firefight. Like it's going to be a lot of fun because I mean, honestly, the past 6 years at the games, or really 5, but the past 5, it's been a coronation, not a competition. And now, same thing and it was the same thing with the men when Matt Fraser was doing his thing, and then he steps aside, and it's like I'm looking forward to watching this.
Yeah,
like, this is going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to start this weekend with the semifinals. And as you mentioned, I think that's a really good point. It's not just one person. Like there's a lot of people now who are looking at this saying, "Hey, I might have a shot here." Like there's going to be a lot of excitement on that final day of individual competition.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels to 2014. Obviously, that year the top 2 women from the previous year were not coming back to the games, albeit for different reasons. And you did have Annie coming off of a season where she was away from the individual. So those are 2 very similar comparisons right away. But also, it opened the door. Like if there was I don't think there's been a bigger surprise champion on the women's side in the history of the CrossFit Games than Camille. I mean, you could argue maybe that nobody saw Graham Holmberg coming in 2010, but if you look at like what it opened the door for like seize the day type opportunity, like it's, and again, I think this is a great point from, well, sorry, I misread that comment, but like, this is, I guess, more in line with what we see on most sports year to year is the uncertainty around who's going to win and the parity across the board. I guess we're just so used to like prolonged dominance now that it's a little bit different for sure.
And just a kind of a closing thought here, because Brian brought this up about whoever wins, asterisks or, they wouldn't have won if. And you, Tommy, I thought you always had a really good counter to that. And this is about who is the fittest on earth at this moment. Right?
Yeah. 100%.
And you do a really good job of explaining that, but it's like, this is about who is the fittest on earth at this moment. And at this moment, it's this person.
Yep.
And that whoever it winds up being, that achievement should not be diminished because neither Tia nor Mal nor Haley are in the competition. Who's the fittest of this 5 minutes? This person. And it's
I mean, you could make that same argument if people are saying, well, was Justin Medeiros really the fittest in, what was it, 2021, the first year that Matt Fraser didn't compete? I mean, I feel like every single year you can continue to ask that same question. So to me, it's just irrelevant. It's sport. That's how it is.
Yeah. There is 100%. You're still the fittest person right now. Because I like in that instance, I'm like, do you think Matt thinks if Matt was like standing there on the sidelines in 2021, it's like, actually, you know what? I'm going to swap out these khakis for a pair of shoes.
Does he wear khakis?
Yeah, I don't know. I always use, that's my default because of that State Farm commercial. It's like,
yeah,
where the wife thinks he's like calling another woman. It's like, oh yeah, what are you wearing, Jake from State Farm? Khaki. It's just like, but yeah, there is an interesting question. I don't know if we want to kind of divert back, but from Corbin, he kind of zooming out. Like, are we putting too much pressure on these young athletes? And that we've seen a couple burnout, and then someone said, Melissa followed up with like an age requirement for competing at an individual level to protect minds and bodies, which is an interesting thought. But I don't know. I don't know if that's CrossFit's place. I don't know if that's the organization's place.
Yeah.
And so that kind of leads me to what kind of resources are out there for teen athletes? Are there any resources?
That is kind of where I was going. I think.
And it makes me think of gymnastics almost, because that's where you get a lot of younger, high-level athletes. That's the parallel I see. But again, I don't know that there's resources for them to get help if they need it.
Well, that's where I think that as an organization, the CrossFit Games can have a hand in, is ultimately helping provide resources for the byproduct of what their sport can create for people that are young. You look at other organizations, whether it's the NFL or the NBA, they do provide resources for the athletes, whether it's I don't know, like this is a very ham-fisted example, and this is something that was a cause of a lot of controversy, but now they do provide resources for things like concussions and mental health services and things like that. That was something that athletes had to lobby for. And there are other resources, whether it's rehabilitative services, things like that the organizations and NBA as a whole will support. But I do think that's something that is not out of the realm of possibility that I think we could look into of what are the resources that we provide young athletes, in addition to things like, hey, we're trying to provide education on supplements and things that you take so you can be as good an educated athlete as possible, but also let's not just think about the physical, the mental as well.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know what other sports. It's very rare. You have it you have it in hockey, maybe in baseball a little bit. You don't have it in the NFL so much because you have to go through college to get there. But where you have these teenage phenoms showing up and competing at a high level. I mean, sometimes in tennis, individual sports, you do golf, but maybe it hasn't been paid as much attention to because it is a rare problem, because you only see, you only for every one that makes it, that there's a couple thousand that didn't, that we either burn out or something. And I don't know. I think,
and that's why I wonder, is it a rare problem though, or do we just not see athletes of somebody like Mal and Haley's caliber coming out about it? I mean, who knows all of the other teen athletes that didn't go individual or didn't keep competing because of these things.
Yeah, and it's also kind of going back to some points later. I think this is and maybe it also could be an exposure thing. We just haven't heard about it on the men's side, but at least from the brand perspective of being a top athlete in the sport, it's something that's been more uniquely difficult, I think, on the women's side, because we do see these 16, 17-year-old young women making the jump earlier, and we haven't seen the development process of the teenage boys. It's just not there. It's almost like you look, if I'm a 16, 17-year-old prospective athlete in the sport, just baked into the expectations is like, oh, you got a few years to develop. You don't got to worry about it. You can go through the 19, 20, 21, like formative years as a young adult, when you're really kind of discovering the world in many ways, or at least trying to, I think in my case, but like, you don't have to worry about like being elite or at the top right now. But if you're someone like a young athlete coming up, and you look at and you see like, hey, like Haley, Mal, this like precedent that has been set before, and you're like, dang, that's my measuring stick,
Yeah.
And I don't think it necessarily matters how rare or not rare the problem is. You can have the resources available for when they're needed. And I know from conversations that I've had that, Brent Fikowski and the PFAA are very interested in putting in place resources that are available for a variety of different things. And I think that now that we have a couple examples of these situations that have come up, that it's not unrealistic for whether it be the PFAA or CrossFit or some combination or another entity altogether to at least put the resources in place so that when an athlete encounters this, that they know where they can go to reach out if they need to.
I think the best thing is that, you know, people are talking about it more openly than they did even just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, when you have NFL players who are openly addressing it, athletes of that caliber, you know, because you think of those guys as like the ultimate alpha males, like they don't show pain or they're not, you know, nothing affects them. And when they start talking about it, I think people start paying attention. So I think the more that we can have conversations about it, the better. I am with Brian. Like, you know, there needs to be, hey, how do we figure this out to where there are resources available? And it might just be checking in with people and say, hey, how's it going? You doing okay? And I would just encourage everybody, if there's one thing that we can all learn from this, check in on your people, man. Like, I saw Mal in Miami. I had, you know, she seemed fine, and people can seem fine. You never know what's going on. So just check in with each other. So is there anything else that we need to add here about this? Obviously it's been an eventful day. Mal and Brian announcing that, you know, she's not competing, and that was a seismic shift in the women's division. So
yeah,
Wad Zombie, I know my lighting's all messed up here. I don't know what's going on. I tried to change it by moving but I'm all washed out.
Yeah.
So whatever. This is my general complexion anyway. Guys, thanks for doing this. Everyone, thanks for joining us. Semifinals, obviously, they start, really tomorrow if you're here in the United States, because Africa's so far ahead of us. But Thursday, North America East, I'll be there. Brian Friend will be there. Lauren's going to be there. And Tommy will be back here in the studio. We're going to have nightly recaps of all the semifinal action for 3 weeks. So once the action's over, if you're not following us on Instagram, please do. We'll keep you updated on there as to when you can tune in. Should be a lot of fun. Again, just all the best to Mal and her and what she's going through. You know, hope she's going to be okay. Guys, thanks so much for hopping on and doing this. Everyone out there, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. As I say all the time, take care of each other, be better, and